She said, "I felt Jesus so close," she recalled in a recent interview. "It wasn't the same Jesus I saw in church. It was this tiny, audible whisper that said, 'I know what happened. I understand.' And it kept me alive, that frayed little thread." By now, more than a quarter century later, that thread has led Miss Shoup, 43 years of age, to become a Presbyterian minister herself, one who has developed religious teachings aimed at repairing the rift between mind and body, soul and spirit. Born out of a survivor's struggle, they form her variation on the broader field of what is called incarnational theology, which focuses on the living, breathing, physical Jesus. "What happened to me wasn't for the good," she said, referring again to her favorite passage in Romans, "but God took the garbage, the stench, and gently, tenderly, indignantly wove it into this moment of redemption. What a gift." What a gift, she said, those tiny whispers of Jesus to this torn-apart teenager. This is Jesus of all the great stories. You know, when we think about Jesus, I wonder sometimes what image you have in your mind and what kind of things you put on Jesus that make him who he is in your own thinking, in your own faith, in your own theology. This Jesus of endless scholarship. If you go in any Christian bookstore, just look at the titles that are just about Jesus, explaining over and over again who this Jesus was. Any kind of point of view you could possibly think of is in those books. And all kinds of other media too. And there are even trinkets, you know, various kinds of things about Jesus that people hold on to. Movies as well as everything else, to try to convince you that whoever produced this stuff has the truth about Jesus. And so often Jesus is given divinity, and we talk about him being the Son of God, even though most of us, I don't think, know what that means. It's not in our categories of life anyway. This man given divinity and put so far above us that he can seem untouchable to ordinary people. And yet broken and battered young Marcia, in her deepest heart and in her wounded soul and trembling body, she felt him so close, she says. And he said, "I know what happened, and I understand." It wasn't the same Jesus I saw in church, she says later in the article. It wasn't the same Jesus I saw in church. And here's the problem, because for many of us, as growing up in churches, what we heard about Jesus was the answer man. You know, the one who solved everything, the one who cured everything, the one who made up all the mistakes and misunderstandings and turned them into something wonderful. That was who this Jesus was. And when she heard him speak to her, all he said was, "I know what happened, and I understand." And that turned Marcia around. Sometimes when we're looking for answers, there are no answers, or we're looking for the good answer when probably there are only 4 or 5 answers, and none of them are really good. They're choices we have to make in life. One of the hardest lessons to teach children, because it was one of the hardest lessons I ever learned, and I suspect for you too, is that it's not good and bad. It's not a good and bad world. It's a mixed up world. And quite often you say to your kid, "It looks to me like you've got 3 or 4 choices." "Yeah, but Dad, none of them are good." That's life. You have to make one of these choices. You have to live with one of these choices. You have to go on with one of these choices. And believe that you will have the strength to do this. But this isn't the Jesus we've often heard of in church. This isn't the Jesus that's proclaimed the Lord of life. And here's the problem. That is the problem. That's what's going on in today's gospel. Jesus presents good news in a new way, and people don't want to hear it. What is he talking about? This isn't the God we know about. Where did he get all this wisdom? It says, where did he get all this wisdom? I think they didn't say, where did he get all this wisdom? I think they said, where did he get all this wisdom? They were astounded, but not happy. They weren't happy with what they heard. And this was certainly no gift in their eyes, and they immediately began to criticize him with the most simple things. Isn't this Mary's son? Isn't this the carpenter? Isn't this the guy from our own hometown? Who does he think he is, coming here and proclaiming God in this new way to us? You know, quite often those kinds of criticisms, and you and I have mounted criticisms like that of others, and we've heard it ourselves, received criticism. Quite often those criticisms are avoidance of something that people know is new and perhaps even true, and something we're going to have to deal with. So then all these distractions come along. All these ways of avoiding anything new that's going to replace something we've held on to for a long time. You know, there's a lot of interesting stuff on the internet or in various kinds of magazines and stuff like that. And if you ever get one of these things where it talks about, you know, there are myths that we all hold on to. People believe with all their heart that this is true. And if you read that to someone who believes that myth, you can't change their minds. For instance, is it true that if you have a hat on, your whole body stays warmer? Do you lose heat through your head if you have a hat on? No, you don't. It's not true. See? It is. It keeps your head warmer. Keeps your head warmer. Does it warm your feet? In your head. See? Here's an example. This is an example. So you find these things out, and it could be, this one is obviously up for discussion. They're all up for discussion. They're all up for discussion. You talk to, for those of us who are baseball fans, tell a baseball fan in Massachusetts, you know, Ted Williams wasn't the best hitter that ever played ball. They look at you like you've completely lost your mind. Everybody knows he was. No, I'm sorry, they don't. It isn't true. That's our problem. Our problem is we are locked into truth that we like, that we understand, that rings true in us. And sometimes it depends on who speaks it, right? This is true of the political campaign, right? Somebody says something who was a politician, and we say, no, that can't be true, because he's in the wrong party. She's in the wrong party. It may be absolutely true, but I don't want to hear it from that side. I'd rather hear it from the other side. And some of the things that politicians say on both sides of the aisle, if you stopped and analyzed it for a while, if you thought about it for half an hour, you'd say, well, that doesn't make any sense to me at all. But the guy's on my side, so I guess I'll take him. Or what we want to hear. This is what we do with our kids quite often. We ask a kid a question, but we know the answer we want the kid to say. And when the kid says an answer, this is great with teenagers, you know, because teenagers never give you the answer you want. They never give you the answer you want. You say to the teenager, okay, I got a question for you. Here it is. And the teenager looks at you, and the first thing a teenager always knows is what you want to hear. And then they tell you something else. Almost universally, I think. I find that fascinating and a little bit wonderful, but I didn't when my own kids were teenagers. I didn't like it very much at all. Sometimes the truth is truth when we want to hear it. Or we bend it to fit our own needs. One of the starkest examples of this, and I may have mentioned it before, was what the American public were told about the Japanese when war became imminent. Do you know that the Japanese were very weak human beings? They had no stamina at all. And their eyesight was terrible. They probably never could succeed as flyers. And their hands were too small to really handle the kind of weapons that war would require. We were told this. The American people were told this. And after Pearl Harbor, things looked a little different, didn't they? It was a truth that, unfortunately, had no basis whatsoever in reality. The reality that Jesus teaches is that hearing the truth requires courage. It requires courage to hear the truth, because you and I may have to let go of something with which we are very comfortable, something that we believe strongly, but really isn't true. And there's opening ourselves and sometimes remaking ourselves, because something comes into our life that is a new truth that really changes us. The Apostle Paul is the prime example in Scripture. He was the guy who hated Christianity, who participated in the execution of Christians. And then God came to him and he changed completely. Paul it was who wrote, "Do not be conformed to the world, but be transformed by the renewing of your minds," in the book of Romans. Jesus was amazed at the people's lack of faith. It seems sometimes people treat good news as though it was bad news. They choose fear or control instead of surrendering to God and surrendering to love. Marcia Shoup's story probably upsets a lot of people when she goes to a Presbyterian church and tells her story, and she tells the story much more graphically. And I'm sure that there are many people in every congregation who have experienced this kind of horror in their own life some way, either themselves or a loved one. A child who is raped, and the parents hear this story. A woman who was raped many years ago, or even just recently, or abused in some other way. Abuse is so rampant in our culture. And so they hear this truth, and it's hard to hear. And it's hard to also hear among people who think that God should have stopped this in the first place and not allowed it ever to happen. Where was God when this terrible thing happened to us? And she says she heard Jesus whisper to her, "I know what happened. I understand." That may be good news, but sometimes people will say it's not good enough. I need more than that. But her life is an example of this turnaround, of this dealing with this situation. Her life with her husband now and her 2 children is so transformed by her faith after that horrible experience when she was 15 years old. What courage and what faith arose out of her pain. What a powerful testimony to the love and care of God shared in the life of Jesus. She said, "What a gift. What a gift indeed." The question is, do we also hear and feel this gift? Amen.